Hello and welcome to the football show with myself, Shane Stapleton, and Declan Bogue, as ever, with me here. His phone is flying. Very, very popular man. Brought to you by OurGame. If you want to get this cool Tyrone jersey, if you want to get... I'll put you on mute there for a second, Declan. He has to take this one. Ideal timing. But if you want to get this cool Tyrone jersey, if you want to get any of the other excellent jerseys that are at OurGame, go there and use the promo code OurGame and you will get 15% off. Obviously, it's a massive weekend in the Gaelic football calendar. We know that things have been set back a couple of weeks because of the COVID cases that were in the camp for Tyrone there. Obviously, different stories coming out and can't exactly be questioned which players are under the weather and which aren't due to the COVID cases. But a significant number are thought to be very much under the weather. The game initially put back by 6 days. Tyrone then came back again and looked for a further extension, which was ultimately granted until Saturday, which will throw in at 3:30 at Croke Park. And the big question is, what level are Tyrone going to be at for that game? Are the players going to be at 100%? Everyone is back at training, and that's the updates that we've seen in the media in the last couple of days. Just a reminder that if you do follow the show regularly, please do continue to follow us and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. And if you want to get audio podcasts, go to patreon.com/OurGame. It really does help grow the channel and help us kick on again into the future. So just one of the articles that I found very interesting this week came from Declan, who I'm sure will be back on the line in a moment. But a point we wanted to talk about was related to Fergal Logan, and quotes he had made to Declan talking about the game being put back and what exactly happened. And when Declan asked him, what are the levels of vaccination in the panel, and we've heard the likes of John Kiley with the Limerick footballers talk about it for his team, and he's kind of said that all of their players were vaccinated. And of course, it depends on what the situation was with players. Some players may or may not decide to take it, and some management teams may insist on it and others may not. But Declan asked what are the levels of vaccination, and of course Logan could have said straight off the bat that that's none of your business, that I can't really tell you anything, and it's people's right to keep that to themselves. But what he said is vaccination was a conundrum, and he kind of talked about how he doesn't. I suppose there's a big question about whether players might miss training or not if they have to go and get a vaccine. That some players might be under the weather for a couple of weeks, and then that how would that affect their preparation? Because if you go into the Ulster Championship for Kerry, and the likes of Mayo, so obviously Mayo beat Sligo and beat Leitrim, and in the day against Leitrim they were down a huge amount of players, but still went out and absolutely hockeyed Leitrim. Just to double check the scoreline, it was a colossal win that day. It was 5-20 to 11 points. But then you contrast that with what's going on in the Ulster Championship, and if Tyrone were missing players against Cavan, who were reigning Ulster champions, then maybe they were going to be in a bit of bother, albeit Cavan had gotten relegated to Division 4 this year. Then next up, after winning that game by 118 to 13 points, Tyrone were up against Donegal, which of course is one of those games that's just going to go all the way down to the wire. They won that game by 23 points to 114. And then most recently, they were down a couple of players and an element of the management team as well against Monaghan in the Ulster final that was at Croke Park. And they won that game by 16 points to 15. And so at this stage, we've been waiting a huge amount of time. It was the 31st of July that game was played. It was the week beforehand that Kerry were last out in the championship. They battered Cork that day, as I'm sure everyone will remember, that they put up 422 to 1-9 that day, and that was a massive victory. So the big question then is around the fact that it was, that vaccines were a conundrum. And you can look at it a couple of different ways, that even if the management made no comment to the players, and I'd love people to get their comments in here and obviously keep them sort of, as PC as possible, because it's a very emotive thing. But the question is whether they would push the panel towards it or whether they would push them to not get it. And therein would sort of, to think that in Gaelic football and amateur sport that you would have someone pushing one way or another, a member of the management team or county board or whoever it might be, trying to push players one way or another. I mean, you would imagine that most people can make their own individual choice on how this would work out. But if they were being asked to just not get the vaccines, that would be quite the situation. And I think Declan is ready to come back in here now, and I just get his thoughts, because Declan, you did speak to Fergal Logan, and I was just describing there that he had said that vaccination was a conundrum. So can you give the context to the conversation that you would have had with Fergal Logan there a week or so ago?
Well, it was pretty poor timing, maybe, because in some respects, because we were talking on the Sunday. I went in to see him on the Sunday, and then within hours, then Kerry had released a statement saying they wanted to play Tyrone at the earliest possible opportunity. But still, like an awful lot of what he had said within the panel and their attitude to, well, just everything that had happened in terms of the infection rates, how it was affecting people, you know, how they just needed another couple of weeks and things would be fine, or push it out for another 7 days and things would be fine in the camp, so on. So really, that's, I suppose, when you get an opportunity for an interview like that, you just really have to go play it with a straight bat and give the subject an opportunity to lay their side of events out. And that's what I did. Fergal Logan and talked about how it affected them, and then we sort of got into other elements of it, such as what measures that had been taken in terms of the protocols around training and their in-house stuff, and then just we talked about vaccination rates, uptake within the panel, and all that. So that's really it, Shane.
Yeah, because that's a difficult one for him to answer. But the fact that he said vaccine is a conundrum. You know, I mean, we are in a culture where you're almost treated as a pariah if you haven't taken a vaccine, or that people are very much putting pressure on people who haven't. Some people, for their own reasons, don't want to get it. Some might include that they're worried about possible side effects. Other people would look at that and say that's absolute nonsense. Very, very emotive topic, and I'm not trying to come out on one side or the other of it. So, like, well, first of all, was it an awkward one? And when he said vaccines are a conundrum, did he expand on that?
Was it an awkward one? I don't know, because, like, there will be so many different. Everyone will have their own view on it, because it's not a sport and controversy anymore, but it has really affected sports. And I suppose when people look at their own individual concerns or what they need right now, is there are people who are unable to visit elderly relatives in care homes, nursing homes, and so on. And it's not a direct consequence of the Tyrone team not wholesale taking up vaccination, but it's an indirect consequence of young people in general having a very poor attitude to taking this vaccine. I say young people in general, like, I mean, you know, of course the majority are taking it, but there is a strange belief out there that you shouldn't do this and this is not for you, and the idea that medicine has not been tested enough because people are reading nothing more formal than Facebook posts. It's causing an awful lot of anguish in the community. And if Tyrone players do not want to get vaccinated, then at least, you know, they should be at least aware of what the consequences of that is for wider society. And I don't think there'll be a pile of sympathy for any of them that don't. I just don't. It might seem harsh, but I think people they'll be livid with that kind of attitude, because then that kind of if people see them as role models, then they're willing to maybe follow their example, or say, well, you know, it's good enough for such and such, it's good enough for me.
There's a couple of comments in here. Roman Timony, I'm hoping he meant conundrum was whether to advise them to get it or whether to leave it completely up to the players themselves, maybe wishful thinking. Padraig Mulcahy says, if they advise that, then I think they're idiots. They're putting players at risk. There is plenty of studies that show athletes in peak fitness are more susceptible to illness. The flip side, there is plenty of studies out there to show that this is a respiratory thing, and exercise and having, you know, the fact that you're exercising is a good thing, which I always found crazy when you were banning outdoor sports. But I think it is certainly a very emotive topic. There is no doubt about that. And the next point I wanted to come on to then is, how many of these Tyrone players do we know that are actually affected? Right, young men, young healthy people, male, female, anywhere in between. They're generally not affected that often. That's not really the point in terms of you want to limit the spread. Absolutely, everyone gets that. But if there was many players particularly sick, that would seem at odds with the general ratios out there.
Yes, it would. But then, so all we know really is what we can go on is what Fergal told us, and he said before there were 17 players and some members of the backroom team. So, and then he kind of revisited and said that there's over 20. So that could be all in players and backroom team, and that could be people who are designated as it's not even people who are vaccinated as close contacts, because he said is infected. So there's obviously been a scenario whereby people are infecting each other. But you see, what needs to be borne in mind here too, Shane, is that, and this is the other day I was listening to the radio, and it announced on BBC Radio Ulster that Northern Ireland had the highest mortality rate, deaths with people who had COVID when they died, in the entire developed world. That's incredible. That is incredible. And it just says, and every time that you look, there's a guy on Twitter called Darren Marshall who does all the stats for Northern Ireland and infection rates.
Yeah, I follow him.
Per borough council. And what you're noticing is Strabane, Mid-Ulster, Fermanagh and Omagh, and their rates are sky high. And these people are, so what are you going to do? Are you seriously going to blame players for catching it? Are you going to say, you shouldn't? When Tomás O'Shea says he can't believe that Tyrone didn't box this off, I actually think that's scandalous. I think that's ridiculous, and I just don't think it couldn't have been thought out. I know it's one of those ones who was asked for a comment. He was standing there. It was ahead of the Dublin Mayo game. He's on live broadcast. He's asked for a comment. He says that such a team should box something off. That I'd say he wouldn't have put it into a column anyway, because you'd have to have a think about that. And you know what? It's a very unfair thing to say, because these people are still out in the open. They're married to, people who are in the front line. They're teachers. Some of them are teachers now. Obviously, schools aren't open, but there's still people who are married to, healthcare professionals and so on. And so, you cannot just put a lid on it. You can't box it off, because that means these people aren't in the NBA bubble. I mean, even a professional sport like soccer, Neil Warnock, the Middlesbrough manager, he's 72. Neil Warnock's 72, probably isn't in the best of health, but he's when you're 72, nobody is. But he can't get his Middlesbrough players to get vaccinated. That's professional athletes, and he has asked them about this, and he has got sort of, the kind of answers that you come back, I didn't think it was safe. The advice isn't great out there. Apparently the medicine hasn't been tested. If professional athletes won't get it willingly, and if they can't be encouraged by a professional sports club to do it, then what hope is there? The only thing is, Dublin had an outbreak. Dublin Hurlers had an outbreak. Fermanagh had an outbreak last year ahead of the league game against Clare. It can happen. It's just, sometimes it's just down to sheer rotten luck.
Yeah, well, we do know that it can be spread even from a person who is vaccinated, but it is interesting the amount of players that are supposedly, or that have kind of gone under with symptoms. And as I say, we don't exactly have a list of all the players in front of us and see how heavy the symptoms are with each of them. I wonder if many players out there have been dropped off panels because they're not vaccinated, or would even any county board even dare ask their players, because it is their personal health. So you're kind of juggling all these things in the air. And being involved in a team myself over the last year, albeit not so much this summer because of work and injury and stuff like that, I haven't really been there. I'm wondering, your experiences, Has any are clubs going around asking their own players, are they vaccinated? I think in general most people are assuming, okay, they're probably vaccinated. But, it's not really one of these things where you can micromanage people's personal health and say, hey, have you got it there? And if they don't, can you say, Grant, you're not training here? You can't.
No, well, I mean, I don't think you can. I don't think you can. But I do believe a bit of guidance. There's nothing wrong with a bit of guidance. Like, I mean, I know if I was managing,
maybe they did, because do you know what? Like, they're talking about. There's been talk in the last couple of days that I think they were talking about vaccinated only people going to Electric Picnic. And Tony Hoolan talking about the All Ireland final should only be vaccinated people. But there isn't legislation for that. Any of the legislation of vaccine only events or vaccinated only events is for indoor stuff. Now, not outdoor stuff. So I would imagine sport would not fall within any remit. And then obviously it's a different jurisdiction in Tyrone rather than the Republic.
Everything about this is unusual and unprecedented and messed up, and everything, therefore any commentary around it deserves to be prefaced with about 1 million caveats and a dozen disclaimers, like, and that's all down to us, like, but I don't see why there shouldn't be. I don't know. I just would be happy enough for people to be told, look, right now, if you're not vaccinated, you can eat outside. Right now, if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to come into Croke Park. I wouldn't have a big problem with that. And some people are going to call me against free choice Nazi. I just think at this point, like, it's pretty important. Like, I'd be very keen to see role models and people in general just saying, yeah, damn it, like, I'm going to take this job.
Yeah, well, but some people will feel they have a legitimate concern, and then they'll say, well, look, outdoor transmission is, very, very unlikely. So, look, again, it's a very, very emotive thing, and part of me is just giving the devil's advocate, but part of me is saying there are real elements to both sides, and unfortunately in the modern world, there isn't really an opportunity to sort of say, well, I don't necessarily disagree without being called a conspiracy theorist or something like that. But I mean, it's obviously, if not everyone's getting vaccinated, there are different schools of thought on it, is the point that I'm trying to drive towards. But it's not like we're dealing with a couple of people who aren't very highly skilled, intelligent guys over the Tyrone team either. I mean, maybe in the Tyrone neck of the woods, people know all about Brian Dooher and Fergal Logan and their backgrounds. But it was just like we talked just before we came on air here. And I was saying to you, look, I don't know that much about Fergal Logan and Brian Dooher away from the football field, but we're not dealing with a couple of goons here, are we?
No, Fergal has had his own law practice for 25 years now in Omagh, Logan and Kerry. And the thing about that is, when you're in a town like Omagh, it's not like a Belfast firm or a Dublin firm where you could be in a commercial law or licensing law or family law. You have to do everything, because you're catering for the farmer 4 mile out the road. You're catering for domestic situations, family breakups, all that kind of stuff. You're dealing with ordinary criminal stuff. So, when that happens, a person such as Fergal Logan that gets, to be honest, he gets called to police stations at any time of the night, mainly Saturday and Friday and Sunday nights. And you have to walk into that place, and what greets you could be anything. It could be absolutely anything. And so you cannot do that kind of role, that kind of job, without a great empathy for everyone across different sections of society. But also the fact that you'd be an expert in criminal law, an expert in insurance law and family, all those kind of things, like, just goes to show sheer kind of bandwidth the man is operating with. Like, it's a rare intelligence. Like, you're talking about Brian Dooher is he started off he was a vet, and now I believe that he is head of veterinary or whatever way you call it, like, for Super Council. These are seriously motivated individuals with brilliant life experience behind them, and do not underestimate these people like definitely do not, because they know what they're talking about. Obviously, with Dooher's experience as a vet, like, you know, he is on top of this. He is on top of COVID. Like,
well, he has a scientific background, I suppose, is the point to be made here. We're not dealing with an Egypt here.
No.
You know, that's agricultural language, but you know, people know what I'm driving at there.
Exactly, and that's probably the way he'd put it there. Like, you know, he himself would use the word Egypt, but no, these are, you know, this is why, you know, there must be some seriously some serious issues. Ethos, like just pure approach, psychology-wise, to all this with young men, and I would say that attitude, it might be replicated in more county panels than we expect. I know that John Kiley said after the semi-final, we are all double vaccinated. Everyone in the panel is, but I would be surprised if that is right across the board in all county panels, because right now, like a panel like Limerick, everything's going well, right? Everything's going well, and they're winning all Irelands, and everyone says, like, we're all going to go and get double vaccinated. It take an unbelievable man to turn around and say, no, I'm not going to do that, and then risk becoming an outlier on a panel that may become the greatest hurling panel of all time.
Yeah, well, see, this is the thing. Like, in a lot of senses, you'd be held up as a pariah if you weren't, and so it would be easier to say, "Yeah, I am vaccinated," and sure, who can prove that you're not? I mean, it's not like you're going to be checking the COVID cert at the door into training at the Gaelic grounds or whatever pitch or training centre it is.
Yeah, as long as you get your ice cream at the end of it, you're happy enough. And I'm double vaxxed, looking away at it.
I mean, and that is what they're up against. Do you think this delay? We're going to do a preview before the match on Saturday from Grove Park. Do you think that this will have a material effect on the game for either side leading into this? I mean, do you feel like you ran into a former Tyrone player the other day, John Lynch, and you know, I mean, you were chatting to him, and you were probably coming up with this topic as well about, you know, how much will this affect Tyrone? How much will this affect Kerry? Kerry haven't played since the back end of July. I think it was the 25th of July.
Yeah, and like, if you look at the margins, like, was it 22 points against Cork?
Yeah, it was 419 to 19, or sorry, 422 to 19 or something.
17 points against Clare. Like, it was 16 points over Tyrone after the league, like in that playoff game. Like, they haven't had a game since the second week that they resumed after lockdown. That was it 112 each themselves in the Dubs.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, they have not been tested. They have no idea what they're like this year. Going down the stretch, 15 minutes to go against another team of decent quality, against a proper team. So, I mean, a lot of that Kerry stuff about, you know, we'll always win it and we don't want to win it in the boardroom. Like, I mean, some of that statement was self-serving nonsense. Like, you know, they needed the game. Let's be honest here. Nobody can dispute that at all. They needed the game more than Tyrone needed the game, because Tyrone, for them, in the first year of a new management team, being hit by COVID, that they lost 3 players ahead of the Ulster final and a joint manager, to win an Ulster title in that first year with absolutely no training done in lockdown, which they didn't do, right? I mean, this is the other thing. Like, Tyrone have been honourable here, whereas a lot of other counties, Shane, have not been honourable and trained all the way through lockdown. But Tyrone have done the right thing by and large and tried to do the right thing through lockdown. And now they kind of deserve this. They deserved it. So to win an Ulster title with all those circumstances and trying to implement something of a policy shift, not a huge one, not as big as some might say, but a bit of a policy shift about how they actually play the game. That was a serious summer's work by Logan and Dooher. And they don't need to go down to Croke Park to get beat by 12 points by Kerry. They absolutely don't. But Kerry needed it more than Tyrone.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at that league game that you mentioned, Dublin and Kerry, 118 to 4-9. In the second half, Kerry scored 1-9 to Dublin's 1-3. So, you know, they're a team that have shown with that. And maybe things change in the context of how Dublin, would you say, collapsed against Mayo? But either way, the way Mayo took over from half-time onwards. But I just wonder with Kerry, the thing is, do they have the stomach for battle to win this All-Ireland? Now, that might sound a little bit harsh. We know they've class. But last year, they lost to Cork in fairly shocking circumstances. And we know how to pick their team, and that's been talked about over and back. But then the year before, Dublin were down to 14 men for, 40 minutes or something like that in the drawing game. Couldn't get it over the line. Is there a question in terms of bottle with Kerry and trying to go on and win an All-Ireland?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so eloquently put by yourself, Shane. I mean, if you're going to ask the question and then give all the examples of the reasons why people might question it, then I'm basically redundant.
Well, I think Mayo are going to win the All-Ireland from here, and it doesn't matter who gets through to the final. I think it'll be a close game, but that's who I think will win.
Who do you think Mayo would rather see coming out the other end?
Let's see. I would. Wow, that's a tough one. I'd say Kerry, because I think Tyrone. If Tyrone can get through, but you and I don't know what's going to happen in terms of how these Tyrone players are going to play at the weekend. But just I think Kerry, they've won one of their last 10 games at Croke Park League and Championship. Now, plenty of those are against Dublin, so everyone was losing to Dublin, so that's fair enough. But their last league game against they lost the Division 1 final to Mayo there a couple of years ago. I just think Mayo have the dog in them. I just think they've got so much battle. They've been here an awful lot of times, and I know they've lost, but they've gotten over the big team now. So I don't think either of the teams hold fear for them. But I think Tyrone and the fact that they have a team that are physically so powerful and have great runners, that can make for an unbelievable game. But I just think there's a little bit of a weakness in Kerry until they win an All-Ireland with this team. And none of these three teams have won it, but I just have a bit more of a question mark over them in terms of battle at the moment.
Yeah, and look, there's a million ways you can look at that you can weigh up all those that very much is the macro analysis, isn't it? You can look at this game here, and I'm just going to, before I get on to about personnel matchups, I was just at the shop this morning, and the famous John Tar Lynch was a Tyrone cornerback and all-star in the 80s. Bumped into him in the shop, and he was taking part in a team talk podcast chat night the previous night from Oma with Banty Maganini, and Gavin Devlin was on as well. And when I was talking to him, I said, do you not think with the last 20 minutes to go that some of the Tyrone players, if they have been affected or even if they've been isolating, because then it means they haven't got even just out for your exercise and stuff like that, they might fade off. But he made the point that you've got two doctors on match day. You've got probably even more physics, medics, all these people feeding in on training days. There's absolutely no chance that they're not going to know the aerobic capabilities of all these players heading into the game. They are all well versed in GPS technology, how to take readings. They're going to be testing them in training sessions as to what their levels of endurance are like, and they can compare them to results a month before, 2 months, and 3 months before. So, when you do it, it's actually a very basic thing that he notes, but it's one that didn't occur to me. Is given the way that you can measure everything's measurable now. There's no way then there is going to be, it's suddenly going to catch somebody out. Oh my God, your man's running low on energy there and there's 20 minutes of this game to go. We never thought about that. They'll know exactly what players are capable of, but they won't be taking a risk either.
Yeah, but will they really? Because it's one thing the GPS at training or getting a lad to do a load of laps or a load of shuttle runs. It's another thing when you're being hit hard. That takes it out of you in a different way.
I would imagine there'll be plenty of hitting hard right now.
Yeah,
but a couple of weeks,
and they are back all training. That is a point that was made.
Oh yeah,
by management.
They have been back. That's Brian Dooher has already come out and say that. So they have been back, and they're picking from a full deck. Whether that is that, I would doubt that 100% of the players are 100%. But where I see where I see that them, sometimes I like to do it the old-fashioned way, right, before a game, and I like to write out the possible starting lineups. And then I'm looking at the Kerry forward line, right? Mm-hmm. In 2019, David Clifford was picked up by Ronan McNamee. And Rowan McNamee done well in the first half. I think he only scored one from play, but then Clifford just took over in the second half and blitzed them, right? Now, Paddy Hampshire has been the man who has been he has been going for the most dangerous attacker in the opposition, and he shut down Conor McManus. He scored a point from play. He shut down. Well, he was on Michael Murphy, and that didn't go well for Murphy anyway as a whole. But Hampshire goes on Clifford, right?
Yeah.
Then you're looking at Paul Geaney, and then you might say, well, then that's Ronan McNamee's man, right? And then you might
he'll probably be on the wing now if we're to go on the rest of the season.
Well, like, I'm just thinking Paddy Clifford is the man that needs to be stopped, and if Tyrone's best man marker, I think right now is Conor Myler. He done a magnificent job on Ryan McInnesby. He's been doing that. Like, he fractured his leg ahead of the 2018 All-Ireland final, recovered in time to mark Brian Fenton. Now, he had to be taken off at half time. There was no disgrace in that. But he'll go there on Paddy Clifford. Then I'm looking and thinking, well, Jesus, there's still a right few lads to be named here, and I haven't even said the name Sean O'Shea yet.
Shawnee Shea. Shawnee Shea.
Shawnee Shea. I got it. So, sometimes you just look at the lineup, you see the likely parents, and you say, you know what, Kerry win about 11, 12 maybe of these matchups on paper, and then that's not telling you much because they've come through nothing. They haven't been tested. They haven't been in a real physical skin and hair flying, and the kind of mental torture that I expect might return to Tyrone, and a little bit of madness. I always felt that Tyrone, by and large, lost that completely in the second half of Hart's managerial reign. Like they kind of lost that real on edge, in your face stuff. If you look at it like in terms of red cards or controversial moments and all that, like they virtually disappeared, and maybe they just don't exist in Tyrone anymore. But I'll tell you, if there was one boy in the line, it's Dooher, and he could unearth one or two that could really try and turn up the temperature a wee bit on the pitch. It's always needed.
Yeah, it definitely is. There's a comment in here, and keep getting them in. Ryner591. How can you have a question over Kerry's bottle compared to Mayo's, when Mayo for generations have always lost on the big day? Prisoner of the moment there. He's obviously referring to me there. But I'm just talking about how often Mayo have gone to the well and they keep coming back. The only team that they couldn't quite get over the line against was Dublin. And you could say, right, well, they couldn't beat them when they were at their peak. But who else has beat Dublin? They were the ones to take them down. And in the previous generation, other than 2014 Donegal, Mayo were the ones who beat them in 2012 also. They've got a core of great players there. Like, if you're going to ask me, who do I want to go to war with? I want to go to war with Paddy Durkin. I want to go to war with Lee Keegan. I want to go to war with Matty Ruane. And, there are excellent players on the Kerry team, don't get me wrong. But if you're asking me who I want to put the final coat of varnish on a lovely table, it's Kerry. And who do I want to make up the table? It's actually Mayo themselves. You know what I mean? Like Zinedine Zidane, the whole quote when what was it, when Claude Makélélé left Real Madrid, he said, okay, that's grand, we're getting in another coat of varnish with another Galactico, but you're throwing out the engine. So, I mean, that's a bit of a dramatized version of what I'm getting at. Do you see where I'm coming at with that? And can I also throw the point back to you? Who do you think Mayo would prefer to play in an All-Ireland final?
If you were a hurling man, you'd say linseed. You wouldn't be talking about gloss or varnish.
There's no hurling on the football show. But tell me, who do you think Mayo would prefer to play if they had their choice?
Yeah, it's a good one. It is a good one.
Would you end up playing football against Kerry and be in an arm wrestle with Tyrone?
No, I think they'd rather. I think I think Mayo's favoured result this weekend is Kerry by about 8 or 9 points. I think that's the best possible scenario for them. Because see, if Tyrone came through, and if Tyrone are going to come through, it's not impossible. But it's a right way off, like it was 4-7 or whatever. Kerry are back that. But if Tyrone were to come through, it would be likely a hugely tight, tense game. And after coming through games like Donegal and Monaghan, especially the second half for Monaghan, put the shoe down completely. And if they could beat Kerry, the confidence that Tyrone would carry into an All-Ireland final. And like, no matter what, might sound cruel, like Tyrone would go into an All-Ireland final against Mayo, even though Mayo have beaten them and handed them, just beaten them comprehensively with no problem whatsoever the last couple of times they met. Tyrone was still going in that All-Ireland final think it's Mayo. This is Mayo, like, we're not going to lose to Mayo in a final. I think they think like that.
Are we agreeing then that we think, we both think Mayo would prefer to play Kerry?
Somehow we are.
Incredible, because I thought you were scoffing at me when I said it.
Yeah.
You probably were. There's one more comment in here from Jamie Wallace. I really rate Mayo's subs bench. Played great last time around against Dublin. I don't know how much we talked about it, or have we had an opportunity to chat since that game. It really was incredible stuff from Mayo, the way they turned that game around, wasn't it?
It's insane. It was insane, but then, like, I suppose it always goes back to the whole thing, like, they talk about chaos, what chaos looks like, and when Dublin lost control of that game, that's when Mayo are like, they come alive, and like, you were there, like the roars of the crowd whenever a Mayo performed a turnover, like, for what, 24,000 in the stadium?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And it felt you could hear every one of them. Like, that was just great passion, like, and it also, like any kind of neutrals there, would have been just looking at the end of just prescribed pattern football, like, so hard to beat Dublin. They played exactly the way, and you know what way they're going to do it. Like, Dublin don't have, and probably without Jack McCaffrey there, and certainly without Dermot Connolly, they don't have the Cian Lynch. They've got all these kind of hurlers, as Limerick have all these hurlers that perform functions, and then they've got like Kyle Hayes that can produce something, Cian Lynch can produce something. Without that, who does that with Dublin anymore? Like, Kieran Kilkenny is one of the most I'm about to say predictable, but he's extremely polished, extremely capable. He can do pretty much everything, but you kind of know what he's going to do at the same time. There's no unpredictability to his game. Conor Callaghan has had that early goals in All-Ireland finals and stuff like that. That's sort of slipping a wee bit from him, like, that unpredictability. But then, how does that happen? It's like when Jack McCaffrey breaks a line, creates an overlap, all of a sudden they've got one more, and then anything can happen. If you always get the free man coming and you run towards the opposition's goal, then anything truly can happen. And Dublin just don't look like they've run out of that kind of option. Even Merchant, just not the same as even all the stuff that Dara O'Shea said in his column about, like, Comerford looking for the quick one. And like, that is such a common tactic, and you see it down in junior football as rather unkindly. Some coaches call it find the dummy, as in let the goalkeeper kick it to the one player who's least comfortable on the ball. And I had kind of forgotten about find the dummy, sort of thing that you think about all the time if you're in a team bubble. I'd forgotten about that and didn't pick up on it at the time. But then, like, obviously when you're at a game, there's a different set of emotions that you're experiencing, and you're picking up on different bits and pieces. But give it to Davy Byrne, and then Davy Byrne has to carry it out because of the rule change. He couldn't give it back to Evan Comerford, and then everyone was hiding, and nobody was coming screaming for that ball. There was a leadership deficit. Then it just looked like the whole thing had gone. Now, I don't know if that's just boredom, I just, as suggested in some other quarters, but I just think it's a team that's just tired, exhausted, done it all, and a lot of the leaders are all gone, and like we have talked. It's a general lowering of standards across the board. And look, it was inevitable then. I know we're saying now in the aftermath, but it kind of seemed inevitable. Like, you'd still think, although Mayo want Kerry to come out of that side of the draw, Dublin would, that Kerry might have annihilated Dublin at the same time.
Oh, I don't know about that. But you know what? Coming into the semi-final, I can't remember who you predicted. I predicted Mayo would win. You were wrong either way.
I said, well, I don't put the hands up. I said Dublin.
Yeah, well, touch classy to admit it there. But I do agree with you about the whole line breakers. Dublin used to have line breakers, pretty much 14 line breakers out the field, and then Cluxton was always able to find whoever was free. And that just isn't there. And I wonder if some of the older players, like James McCarthy, what a player he's been, probably going to be in the top 20 players of all time, maybe, you know, not far off that. But he's not breaking the line the way he used to be. Like, these forwards aren't getting the ball on the front foot and being able to turn one-on-one. Remember a couple of years ago when Con got the couple of goals on Lee Keegan, he was able to turn and just blast past it. But there was no one around to help Keegan out either. Whereas now it feels like, because they're not getting line breakers all over the field and creating 2-on-1s everywhere, how are the forwards going to get the ball early enough to do the same sort of damage? So it's not really there. A couple of comments in here. Shane's face when he started slagging off Con a bit. Don't say that about my teammates, says Jamie Wallace. And then Porter, Tyrone have been disappointing outside Ulster for a long time. What do you think? What do you say to that?
I say that's a very interesting name, Porter. I'd love to know where that comes from.
Well, let us know, Porter.
Well, I'll tell you, if it's like there was a certain Porter about Liston Ski in Fermanagh 100 years ago, and if you knew the kind of carry-on he used to get up to, that's amazing. Yeah, of course they have. Like, I mean, they beat Mayo and Kerry and Dublin in 2008, and they haven't beaten any of them in Championship football since. So I mean, that speaks for itself. They beat Donegal in the Super 8s in 2018 and beat them then this year, but it can't be said, like, from their two Ulster titles in 16 and 17 that they haven't, like, there's such a glass ceiling there for that particular breed and that generation right there. They have not beaten one of those, if you want to call them, other top four counties. And until they do, so they're going to continue to disappoint. And but I'll tell you one thing, like, see, living in Tyrone at the moment, you wouldn't know that they're going into an All-Ireland semi-final. Like, there's such a lack of buzz, such a lack of discussion about it. It's like all the discussion about Tyrone is about their health and concern for players. But like, you could drive from Clogher to Ahar to Atnacloy and not see and as I have done the other day, and not see a single Tyrone flag out. Like, there might be one hanging out of a pub window, stuff like that. It's just, it's nowhere near where it might have been. Nowhere near. Like, Oma have it up in John Street, but that's just a collection of pubs all vying for people to come in and take their pints there.
Are we heading for the ultimate ambush, though? I mean, there's part of me thinking if the Tyrone players in general, they're all back training, if they're 98% right, or if there's only one player who's not 100% right and doesn't start, like, the panel is pretty strong, to be fair. Now, if a key guy is out, that changes everything. But are we kind of half set up for the great ambush here?
And it's also given extra time to Cathal McShane.
I mean, like, he looked very ropey when he came on in some games this year.
Ropey and leggy, like, you know, I mean, big occasion and a sort of a poor enough build up, like, you know, to it. That could affect people, but, like, you know, you've got, like, Conor McKenna. Just one thing about him, like, is you know, I've watched him come on against Donegal, and the first thing he did, he went to put a ball and switch the point of attack, but he hammered it that hard that it nearly went out over the end line in Brewster Park, and that to me just smacked of a fella that is just mad keen to do something. Get me on the ball, let me do something. Another time he made an interception and he played a hand pass. He looked for the return and he ran down the line in front of the press box, and he was just gaining yards on the fella that was chasing him, and yet still he was looking over his shoulder screaming for the hand pass to come. Like, he just, to me, he started off like an absolute train. And, you know, there was a graphic produced by the Irish Times about the involvement he had in the two league games he played and how much scores came off him, how much he scored. And it was just, it looked like this guy had landed fully developed as a playmaker and finisher. But that sort of tailed off. Like, Neil McGee marked him then in the championship and kept him scoreless in the first half. McGee had to go off injured, but the damage was done. I think Conor McKenna's confidence that day took a serious hammering, and thereafter he just hasn't looked the same. Like, I mean, he played Armagh in Oma and he barely touched the ball in the second half, and he was calling for his boots broke. all these kind of wee small things seem to be niggling at him, and they haven't named him in the starting lineup. You know, they've been keeping him in reserve. Against Monaghan, it looked like it's coming for him. It does look like it's coming for him. But they will know they need an off season. As a new management team, they need a huge off season with Cal McShane and Conor McKenna to fashion a team that could win an All Ireland.
Yeah, and a final point then, we'll preview in more detail on Saturday once we have the teams in front of us, because that might change the complete complexion of this. But I suppose a final point between now and then is what way you sort of leaning. And the other thing is, because Tyrone have played at Croke Park just a few weeks ago in the Ulster final, and Kerry haven't played there since they replayed All Ireland in 2019. Is there any sort of an edge there for Tyrone? Because maybe some of the players, they've obviously played in the 2018 All Ireland and a few semi-finals in that, but it was no harm playing there recently.
I don't really think so. I think that if you've got a Kerry team with the personnel they have, the amount of minors that they've been knocking out All Irelands and winning All Irelands on an All Ireland day as minor players, I don't think that truly matters anymore. And anyway, you're going up the road every second year to play Dublin in a big National League game there. It's kind of, I don't, yes, Tyrone have had more recent experience, but there's no way that Tyrone players to a man over the last 5 years have had the same experience as the Kerry players of playing big games in Croke Park.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, we'll touch on this more on Saturday. A reminder, we're brought to you by OurGameRetro.com. If you want to get this Tyrone jersey or any of the other really cool retro jerseys, go to OurGameRetro.com, use the profile or the code OurGame, and you get 15% off. And also, don't forget to subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button in the right-hand corner. It's free to subscribe and it helps the channel grow. So thanks very much. We'll be chatting to you again soon, Declan.
All right, Shane. Take care.